You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Over recent weeks, you've probably heard about Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. It's a multi-trillion-dollar fiscal package that Washington had been in legislative deadlock, arguing over whether to pass. It did, and it has major implications for the clean energy of the United States and beyond. Hello and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Jack Board. Hello to Liling Tan. How are you?
I'm well, same, good. Still think we're doomed, but otherwise good. How are you?
Still think we're doomed.
Absolutely.
I'm good. I'm full of endless hope for the ingenuity of the planet and everyone on it. Now, I know you were US based for a long time, right? And so I guess naturally a close watcher of American politics then and now. What do you sort of make of the way that laws are being passed and the tone and the divisions that seem really apparent? They've always been there, I think, but seem really apparent there right now.
Oh, well, that's a huge question, Jack. Okay, so, President Trump has been ranked as one of the most divisive and polarizing U.S. presidents for good reason, right? We've seen him, flouting diplomatic norms, rejecting legislative process. We see this in his excessive use of executive orders, and his style of leadership is more deal maker in chief. But he is also someone who seems to want to be peacemaker in chief as well. And we see the way he deals with the Iran nuclear talks, with Israel-Hamas war. He wants deals. He wants ceasefires. He wants them quickly. And
I guess the ceasefire is like a deal in his mind.
Yeah,
right?
And there's all this talk about him making a play for the Nobel Peace Prize as well. So I think he set some real targets. But where we see him less invested in is the green transition, right? We see that in his One Big Beautiful Bill, where his energy policies can be described quite simply as regressive.
Well, we'll be talking a lot about this bill throughout today's discussion, and we've got an expert in to talk us through it. First, it's quiz time. We are talking about clean energy policy in America, but how does it stack up, actually, versus other big countries? Given all of its technology and wealth, has it actually advanced further or fallen behind? So I want you to rank these countries by total installed clean energy as a proportion of total energy production. So basically, what percentage of the country has clean energy, roughly? We've got 5 options for you.
All right, bring it on.
So you've got the US, China, India, Japan, and Indonesia.
Wow.
Different narratives coming out of all of these countries, but interesting to see how they play out and match up with the reality of what's actually been done in these countries.
Okay, so you don't have the obvious green Nordic countries here, those with the really high percentage of clean energy production and usage. So wait, what were they
We've got
again?
the big boys.
You've
boys
got
here.
you've got China, you've got the US, India, the big boys, you've got Japan, and what was the other one? Indonesia. Okay.
Answer at the end. Now it's time for our main story this week. US President Donald Trump had a big win early this month when a key bill, officially called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, was passed by the country's Senate and House of Representatives. It's a sprawling piece of legislation that includes tax cuts, social welfare programs, defense and border security, education, and infrastructure. While a lot of the significant changes are domestic, a key aspect for us is the focus on energy and climate. The bill's passing signals a significant policy shift away from renewable energy incentives towards expanded fossil fuel development and a rollback generally of America's climate commitments, but more support for nuclear.
That's right. Nuclear was a bit of the anomaly there, I think. For the most part, though, the clean energy sector and the transition to cleaner fuel consumption will be hit as subsidies from the Biden era Inflation Reduction Act are dialed back or removed. Now, the wind and solar sectors will feel the pinch as this bill would redirect the priority on them away and back to fossil fuels, oil and gas. The law also scraps tax credits for rooftop panels, electric vehicles, as well as heat pumps, so it becomes more expensive for households to use clean energy. Overall, this bill has cast a shadow over a lot of the country's green momentum and credentials. The big question is to what extent this is really going to hurt the clean energy industry, the clean energy momentum that we've seen.
And we love having an expert talk us through the details of this. Who better than someone who I think we can now call a friend of the podcast? It's Alexander Kaufman, an independent energy, climate, and geopolitics reporter who joins us from New York. Alex, great to have you back.
Great to be back, and what an introduction. Now I know that we're friends.
If you were in doubt before, now you can really feel the warmth coming from the podcast.
I do.
Okay, how much of this, Alex, has been an unwinding of what Joe Biden implemented in the last years of his presidency, and how much of that energy architecture will actually survive this bill?
It's been quite striking, when the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law were authored mostly by Democrats. Obviously, the bipartisan one included Republicans as well, and signed by Joe Biden. There was a working theory there that by creating policies that supported a lot of very popular bipartisan goals and by funneling upwards of 3/4 of the federal funding in the direction of red and purple states and districts, that this would create too powerful a base of support for these laws to ultimately unwind them, even if Republicans came back into office and carried on the same anti-climate, pro-fossil fuel agenda that Trump had in his first administration. That thinking has been proven completely wrong. The One Big Beautiful Bill, as it's called, used the same reconciliation pathway, which is essentially using the bill that funds the federal government and tacking all kinds of things into it, that passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And through that, they were actually able to broker cuts of all kinds of programs. They were able to significantly cut back a lot of the tax credits that were supporting clean energy. They were able to significantly gut the policies that were supporting electric vehicles. And they were able to even include things that were previously unthinkable, like putting new subsidies in place to support coal. Now, that doesn't mean that everything has been lost. There is a notable theme here, and it's not just in opposition to clean power on the whole. It appears to be in opposition to intermittent clean power. The president has long had his druthers with wind turbines. He has been very critical of solar energy. The positive thing is that things like geothermal, which is a really exciting emerging area, particularly in the US right now, and nuclear power, where there's a lot of excitement, are things that the Trump administration does indeed support. So a lot of the support for energy sources like that was indeed preferred. And a lot of the support for things like critical mineral mining and production were indeed preserved as well, although the question remains, if you're getting rid of the incentives for electric vehicles, which is the largest demand pull, who's going to buy all of those minerals that you are hoping to mine?
Okay, so Alex, how much of a boost is this bill, this big, beautiful bill, going to have on America's oil and gas sector?
So, from the very start of his administration, he has been pushing for drill, baby, drill, an increase in production beyond the record levels that we already saw at the end of 2024. Now, it is a positive thing for the end uses of those fossil fuels within the United States. So we already were seeing record demand for natural gas, for power plants, and for turbines to power the data centers that are undergirding the artificial intelligence boom. We were already seeing record demand for gas just because we have a hot summer and increased demand for air conditioning as such. And we were already seeing growing demand for oil and gasoline for automobiles as people are driving more typically in the summer, and certainly with some of the regulatory policies that we see the president adopting, things that are designed to reduce the efficiency of new automobiles that are sold in the United States, that will, in the long term, preserve that market for oil and gas. So we can definitely expect to see that.
Mm.
So let's say you're an oil producer or you're a fracker or you're a coal miner, and I know you're none of these things, but is this a case of cashing in now given the political climate? Or is this a more fundamental recalibration of energy production in the United States that will be felt for many years?
It's a good question. Overall, I think we do see a somewhat positive trend in the form of a lot of these companies sort of understanding the need for some kind of diversification. And
Mm,
that actually has very little to do with what the president is pushing for at all, and more to do with the sheer physics and market dynamics in energy markets today. There's a funny story where natural gas was long sold and, by some people's standards, misrepresented as a bridge fuel to a renewables future. Well, now NextEra, one of the largest utility companies in the United States and the largest operator of renewable plants in the United States, is now talking about renewables as a bridge fuel to more natural gas, because natural gas turbines are so back ordered right now due to these AI data centers purchasing them. In some cases, there's a 7-year wait to get one of these super
crazy.
fast combined cycle
Wow.
turbines. So you're seeing this demand for renewables simply because they're cheap and they're fast, and the demand is growing now. And in the
Mm,
long term, I think, you have a lot of these companies that are looking at the market volatility that has existed around oil and gas, especially in the years after the Ukraine war. And, globally, we saw what prices looked like, particularly in the region where you guys are, where people are very dependent on LNG and prices shot up very aggressively.
Mhm.
That has, I think, demonstrated to a lot of people the value of having a long-term asset like a nuclear reactor that
Mm.
doesn't need to be fueled as often, and while it may take a long time and a lot of money to build initially, essentially gives you this very permanent and high functioning piece of infrastructure that can insulate you from the craziness of the natural gas market and that kind of
mm.
volatility. So, despite all of these incentives to continue with the old ways, I think that there is an unshakable recognition right now in the energy world that, while yes, this is a great time for gas and it's a great time for oil, it's a great time for a lot of other energy sources as well.
Mhm.
And thankfully, there are at least a handful that do meet the criteria of both parties, as polarized as they are on issues like wind and solar in the US right now.
What kind of impact is this going to have on households in America, though? We were seeing this shift. More people were adopting the use of solar power, but given the action against rooftop solar panels, EVs, and what is it? There was a third item, heat pumps. What kind of
Mm.
impact is this going to have on American households' pockets?
The expectation is that this is going to raise energy prices, and not only that, it will raise energy bills because yes, there were all of these different types of tax credits and incentives for purchasing this new type of equipment to drive or to heat your home. There were also a lot of tax credits and regulations that were designed as incentives to help you buy new energy efficient appliances or help you
Yeah.
buy a new windows, new insulation, different types of home renovations that would actually make your home more efficient, less drafty, keep all of that air conditioning you're paying good money for with rising electricity bills in the house that you're trying to air condition and not going outside.
Mm.
And a lot of that has gone away. There are already millions of Americans that were using those things.
Hmm.
There are millions and millions more who won't get the chance. So this is going to likely raise bills in the short term. We were already seeing price hikes coming down the pike, even under the last administration. Now we have far fewer policies to help individuals cushion that.
Mm. EVs are in the crosshairs. And we spoke to you about this in January, but since then we've seen this really ugly fallout between Trump and Elon Musk. And it seems
Mm.
that the US is unlikely to remain a top 3 EV producer over the midterm. Do you think that the gasoline chuggers are back, or is it more nuanced than that, given the impacts on this industry?
Well, we had already seen a real problem for EVs in the US, stemming from the fact that we were a little late in the game. A lot of manufacturers struggled to get prices down. The battery packs, we hadn't really yet built out the infrastructure in a meaningful way here to be able to cheaply produce those the way that, for example, China can, and BYD and CATL have demonstrated the ability to. And we really didn't build out the infrastructure to really incentivize people to want to keep buying these things. So there was already a significant drop in sales relative to what was expected circa 2022 in years like late 2023 and 2024. So we had already seen a big boost in hybrids. There was sort of a return to the hybrid model of people getting cars that did both. I think we're
Mm.
likely to see that continue. But yeah, I think you're going to see a pretty significant stalling out in the years to come on EVs. And I think that there's a general consensus here that the withdrawal of these policies that were meant to support battery production and EV purchases in the US are essentially ceding the fight over this technology to China. I mean,
Mm.
as it is, you look at some of these Chinese models that you guys are probably more familiar with than I am because they don't exist on the roads here the
Right,
way that they
right.
do in much of the rest of the world, including in Europe, right? And they're just really quite stunning and have all of these features that make a Tesla look like 20th century technology.
Yeah.
And they're also way cheaper and more affordable. So I
Mm.
think there's a kind of recognition that the US has lost this race a little, but some of the automakers are still in the game. I mean, GM and Ford are still talking about pressing forward on battery plants. So there
Mhm.
seems to be a recognition in at least parts of the industry that this is the future, but the federal policy and the levers you would expect are necessary to drive that kind of change in a market the size of the United States, they're really not there anymore.
Mm. I think it is really interesting right now to compare what the US is doing in terms of energy policy with China, because they couldn't really be more divergent. And you have energy security and influence seeming to be more important calculus than climate goals for both of those countries, even if Beijing is taking a path of fewer emissions. So, how do you read the geopolitics of this in light of what the world seemingly still trying to do in reducing emissions?
I think we are generally seeing a recession in concern over these issues. I think there was a fundamental shift that took place in 2022 with the invasion of Ukraine. I think that the focus in Europe, which has long been a bastion of fighting for emissions policy for emissions policy's sake. And I draw that distinction from perhaps a place like China, which has indeed done tremendous work, perhaps the world leading work on decarbonization, but in many cases, it was because developing these types of alternative forms of energies is an important way to provide themselves energy security when they don't have domestic oil and gas reserves the way that the United States or Norway do. The US loves to talk about Chinese and Indian emissions being much higher than US overall emissions today. Mind you, it's never the case if you look at a per capita level, but they love to talk about that when in fact, if you look at the cumulative emissions, and cumulative emissions are indeed the problem, right? The US bears the largest responsibilities. And so I think
Mhm.
a world in which the largest and most powerful economy is openly promoting a kind of individual nationalism and balking at the very idea of dealing with emissions at all is one where even if other countries step in and try to pick up the slack, it's just not going to really be enough. I hate to say that, but term
Mhm.
hope is just that there is enough development of these technologies
Mm.
that the convenient option becomes the clean option. And, if you're looking at where that may be happening, China is certainly leading the world in that today.
So, in a nutshell, yes or no question, Alex, is this one big beautiful bill a clean energy industry killer or not?
Giving him one word, come on.
All right, you get a few more words than yes or no.
Yes for renewables and clean automobiles, no for nuclear and
Mm.
geothermal. But overall, probably more leaning yes, because even the funding for those programs is less generous than the legislation this is replacing.
a reasonable hedge, I think.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
I think you can accept that. Thanks as always, Alex. Really great to chat. Where best to find your work if people are keen to see what you're working on a daily, weekly basis?
Best place to find me is on Substack, where you can find my work at my last name, Kaufman, Kaufman.substack.com, or via the URL kaufman.nyc.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Alex.
Back to the quiz then, repeating it for you, Li-Ling. Can you rank these countries by total installed clean energy as a proportion of their total energy production? America, China, India, Japan, and Indonesia.
Okay, so I'm going to go with China and the US.
China number one.
China number one, followed by the US. It's either China or the US, but I think China might have an edge now. So China, US, and then India, just sheer size alone.
Size doesn't matter here.
I know they're also doing a lot of development and investment into clean energy and also quite some movement on the SMR front as well on the small modular reactor for nuclear energy. So they're invested in the green transition. Japan, I think, is also a key player. And then Indonesia probably at the end. So what was that?
China, US, India, Japan, Indonesia. Okay. Well, most of your logic is good. But if we actually line up the answers, one mistake makes them all incorrect. No, sorry. You got two of them right.
Okay.
You got two of them right.
All
You
right.
bookended it correctly. China is number one, followed by India, and then Japan, then the US, and Indonesia coming in at fifth place. They're quite close.
Okay.
US around 35.5%.
Oh, it's slipped
Japan
quite a lot
slightly
then.
more, 38, and India up at 43%.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the best data I can find for all of these countries. China at top 51 and Indonesia about 16. So there you go.
Wow. Okay. Good quiz.
That's all for this week. We will be back here next Thursday. Thanks as always for listening. Catch you then.
I'll see you all back here. Liling Tan signing off for this week.
I'm Jack Board. Thanks to our team that produced this episode, Zaye Win, Tiffany Ang, Janani Jahari, and Panning Ho.